Hello, friends. This is Boone Christensen here, and we are in the office today at Steps Family Therapy. And today we are going to learn about the concepts of dissociation and how mental illness progresses, both how it develops and how it changes, and also how we get better from it. Okay. And we are going to be using the U diagram as seen here. We're going to look at the river model as seen here. um, I think we're going to start here at the moment. So where do we begin? We could start at the beginning. When we are babies, we are totally mindful creatures. We are always in the present. We're not thinking about the past and we're not thinking about the future. We are here and we are now. And babies experience a full range of emotions. When they are sad, they cry. When they're angry, they scream. When they're afraid, they feel fear, right? And when there's no intense and irregular distress in the baby's life, they recover, right? They become calm and happy relatively easily. But what happens over time? Over time, babies get to a point where their anger or their sadness or their fear are not tolerated, or they are punished or invalidated or even tried to be fixed, right? For some reason or another, it feels like their feelings are not allowed. And what that does is that induces depression, it induces the shutdown of those emotions. And if the depression is also not allowed for some reason, right? Either it's punished or invalidated or shamed, or it is fixed, right? People trying really hard to draw that person out of the depression, then that sends a signal that this depression is not adaptive, that this depression is not allowed. So, what's the next step? Often it'll be entering the dissociated side of the brain, meaning the part of the brain that is not connected with the present, not connected with reality, and creates emotional responses disproportional to the situation. If we were looking at like an animal's progress through the brain, um, we might see an happy, calm animal, right, who is chased by a predator and so starts to run, um, and enters into their hole, right? But if that predator were to try and enter the hole, then suddenly the strong defensive mechanisms kick in, right? The panic or the intense fight back, right? The rage. But what if those emotions are not allowed? In the animal kingdom, usually the fight ends around here. But if those emotions can even then get shut down, if they don't produce any effective response, or it doesn't, or the situation doesn't kill you, humans enter logical dissociation. This is a new state that is different than the mindful side because it is analytical, it is functional, it is productive, but it is non-emotional and non-empathetic. It has a really hard time connecting with the present and with people around it. Okay, so this chart describes just one cycle of, of entering dissociation. And so this might happen with one sequence of a trauma, right? So let's take a look at what happens when this happens repeatedly over time, right? So you start out here in your baby state, you're totally present and mindful and full range of emotion state, right? You experience that anger, that anxiety, it's shut down. You experience that depression, it is then shut down. You experience the intense emotions that naturally follow when a depression is not allowed, and you enter a slightly more dissociated state. And what if this happens again, right? Because we always want, our bodies are always trying to heal, right? Kind of like with injuries, with bones, with sicknesses, our bodies are always fighting to get back to a healed, healthy state. So we can kind of describe that as like a river, right? A river that is pulling us to that state, but it has to go the way it came. Right? So there's always a force trying to pull us back down through that loop to get back there. Right. And so there's always going to be some sort of force trying to pull us back into those emotions. But what happens if we're still not in a safe place and those emotions are not allowed? And what's going to happen is you're going to continually go down into depression and back up, but backwards, right? Steadily having to compartmentalize your experiences and your emotions, disconnecting yourself from reality. Right? So you keep going over and over and over again. And now we'll describe what diagnoses different courses can produce. And we'll go ahead and pull up the whiteboard for this. All right. So let's go ahead and draw our river brain model right here, which gives us enough space to travel. So let's think about a situation of, of mild depression. Okay. Someone is in a relatively healthy state, relatively mindful, relatively non-traumatized, and they experience something hard, right? Maybe a breakup or they lose their job, just something that's really stressful, right? They enter that fight or flight, stressed kind of state, um, but but doesn't really get them anywhere. They're still in that hard situation. Like the person doesn't come back. They can't beg for their job back. They may enter a mild depressive state, right, where things shut down for a little while. If that person is allowed to feel their emotions, right, and maybe even say some irrational things, right, if they're just able to work through the tension of their emotions, then their body will recover. It'll go back the way it came, back up, probably even to a state of greater mindfulness, right? Because now they have experienced something really hard and they recovered from it fully in a safe place. Okay, this mild depression is recovered from, or this acute PTSD, right? This traumatic event doesn't become stored up trauma because the person was able to recover then and there. So let's imagine, see if I can erase a few things here. All right. Let's imagine a trauma that a person can't recover from, that they don't feel safe to recover from. Okay, such as a sexual assault, right? The person experiences the distress of the situation and the trappedness of the situation, and their body goes into shock, uh, um, experiences freeze mode, right? The term is tonic immobility. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of here. They experience tonic immobility, where the body is so paralyzed by fear, surprise, um, by the stress around it that it just can't move. And then the person tries to recover. Right? They try to cry and express anger to try and get get that trauma out of their body, but their system doesn't allow it. Maybe there's victim blaming or shaming. The person is told that it's not okay to be sad about this. The person is told that it was their fault, that there's no, that they didn't fight back, right? It's their fault. They're not going to re-enter a state of mindfulness. They're going to have to dissociate from that because it's too painful to try and process from the trauma. Right? They're going to have to store up that trauma into dissociation. They'll have to disconnect from reality a bit more. Okay, so that would be an acute PTSD that a person does not recover from. It becomes stored trauma. Let's take a look at a, a severe anxiety disorder or OCD, right? So this person might experience a mild trauma. This might be like an argument with the parents, right? They feel angry, shut down, When they try and express that anger, it gets shut down. And so they enter a new state of dissociation. They learn that it's not okay to experience anger towards their parents. And they also learn maybe that it's not okay to experience depression, right? It's not okay to be down and sad, right? Somebody might come and try and fix it. So as this person tries to process their emotions, they're going to try and move down, right, into those extreme emotions, experience the depression, and they get shut down again, and they're going to keep moving backwards. And that might happen repeatedly, right, until they get to this point. And then this person comes into therapy with their severe anxiety or their obsessive compulsive disorder. And what this does is when this person tries to re-enter those emotional states, it triggers another kind of anxiety, right? There's already a voice embedded in their head saying it's not okay to experience that fight, that anger or anxiety, right? And it's going to try and send them back up, right? It's going to try and create their own cycle. But if we can process that and the person makes it down into the depressive state, that's going to trigger another kind of anxiety. They're going to feel like, oh, it's not okay to be depressed. It's not okay to be sad. And that's going to try and send them back up. And they can get caught in these loops, right? If we're not very careful, we have to recognize that when we get down and we trigger that depressive state and another anxiety comes up, that we have to process that anxiety first, right? We can't push this person through depression, right? We have to process their anxiety about the depression, and then they can experience the depression, okay? And that can help them get up to that state. And what about personality disorders? So when a person experiences repeated traumas, be they macro or micro traumas, and they steadily move backwards in the brain, and they get to this state where the river is really, really strong. Because the further back into dissociation you get, right, the stronger the river wants to pull you down into those intense, painful emotions. Folks with personality disorders are they can be very functional, right? We should say that. They learn to be highly functional. They learn to distract themselves. They learn to be busy all the time, but they're also easily triggered, right? So it doesn't take too much to send them into that more dissociated fight or flight state, that state of intense, irrational emotions. And often they they have to cope in a very intense way to stay where they're at, right? So a person with, say, a narcissistic personality disorder, if they get drawn into that intense distress, they'll often bully people, right? They'll shut everyone else down to appease their emotions, and that will let them stay where they're at. A person with borderline personality disorder might experience intense distress and maybe break off the relationship, or go fawn. Their fawn response will be activated to bring that relationship back. Or they might go have sex with somebody else, right? Something intense. They might use drugs, right? Or pornography or something to get back into that part of the brain. And obviously that's the point of essentially all drugs, is to draw people back to the upper brain, for better or worse. And how you treat people with personality disorders is you need to induce the distress in a safe place for them so they can run through the emotional cycle, right? And it is really hard for a therapist to sit here and to induce distress in somebody with a personality disorder and let that person just blow off rage, right? And say all sorts of ugly and irrational things. But if I'm prepared, right, and I'm in a good state as a therapist, then I can let those emotions happen, and this person will enter that depressive vulnerable state, and they will recover, and they will enter a new state of greater awareness and greater mindfulness. So, um, so let's think about a few different courses that we have here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just scrap this picture here. We'll go ahead and draw a new one. And there are several different ways. Well, there are obviously many different ways to recover from mental illness, meaning many different courses that we can take. Okay. So obviously the first one that I showed you is somebody recovering from something mild, right? Like a singular traumatic event. And they dip in, they feel those intense, painful emotions, and then they come out recovered, right? This might be like a one and done therapy session or just a couple of sessions to help them through that. And then some people say if they've gone through um, a lot of different cycles, a lot of different traumas, so they get to this point right here. They they might move back through kind of the same way they came, right? Like every therapy session, we're just moving a little bit further down the river, right? Down into depression and then to a state of grief and then a calm state for a little bit before we draw them back down, right? We bring up some new trauma. They experience some more shutdown and they steadily move through this cycle every therapy session. Or they stay down for a long time, right? They go down into that hard stuff and they stay in it. Their environment is conducive to kind of a perpetual state of depression and intense anxiety, right? This might be something like residential treatment, right, would allow for this. And they can stay down there and work on the stuff and come out the other side like much more healthy, right? They spend a long time down there doing the work and they come out further on the other side. So that's another potential course that people have. But I'd say the most common course for people in therapy is to kind of go through the waves, right? Because they come in, they feel their emotions, move along the river, and then they come out to take a break, right? Stay dissociated and kind of in a defensive state for much of the week, and they come back and we work on it. It's more gradual like that. And then, of course, there there are folks that move backwards, perhaps over the course of therapy. Right, they're here, they go down into those feelings, and then something bad happens. Right, somehow or other, they are punished for entering those feelings. Like maybe I help them process the trauma of their sexual abuse, and then they go home to try and talk about it with a family member, and that family member invalidates them. Right, then they end up moving backwards. Right, this lets me know, oh, it's actually not a good time to process this trauma because your home environment is not safe enough to for this to be effective. Or um, or we process, maybe we enter into those deep emotional states, and the experience of depression is just too triggering. It's too scary for that person, and we can't recover from it safely in therapy, and so they move backwards and they might quit therapy. They say like, hey, that was too hard, too scary, I'm not going to go there, I'm going to block it back further in my mind. It's not their fault, it's just that the therapeutic environment plus their home environment was not safe enough. And that obviously creates delays because now we'll have to process that trauma, right, and come out the other side before we can try and do this again, right? Maybe a little bit slower, right? Do softer exposures, and come back up and give them a little more experience sitting with those feelings safely before they go as deeply as we wanted to go that first time. So let me think if there are any other points I need to cover here. I think we've mostly got it. Obviously, I want people to understand their own course as well as possible, and mapping it in this kind of way can help us to understand. So please leave comments, send me messages, let me know what you think and what questions you have about this. Thanks for tuning in to gain a bit of understanding about dissociation and recovery in therapy.